everyone. I'm very excited to present my project to you today as an AAUW dissertation fellow for 2024 to 2025. My name is Tran. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. And my dissertation research and project is entitled The Ark Is Already Gone, A History of Boat Refugee Non-Arrival. But for the purpose of this short presentation, I'm going to just really talk in a condensed manner about what I call Vietnamese refugee histories of non-arrival, which I will explain in the following slides. Okay, so if you have had any sort of prior exposure to understanding Vietnamese diasporic history, you may know that the way this history is told of the post-war tends to follow a very orderly kind of pattern. And this pattern resembles what I have here on the screen, which is first kind of escape from the homeland due to communism and take over of South Vietnam, to kind of landing in refugee camps, whether by plane or boat, depending on the year in which the refugee person leaves. And then finally being resettled in the nation of asylum, which I call kind of like arrival, right, at the third country nation. So this particular pattern emphasizes survivorship bias, which are the narratives of those who succeed in kind of coming to the West and gaining citizenship or gaining refuge. And as a result, by kind of sticking to this particular history, this orderly format, what is missed is all those different transit histories and mobilities that percolate outside of these fixed points. So I'm interested in the project in kind of unsettling this. And before I get to that, actually, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about what these fixed points tend to be. So in Vietnamese refugee history, it's often kind of the diaspora is broken up into three different waves of migration. The first wave kind of encompasses the 130,000 refugees that immediately leave from the fall of Saigon by U.S. airlift or U.S. Cargo ship to kind of military bases in Guam and the Philippines. And these first 130,000 would come to places, as you know, Camp Pendleton, Fort Indiantown Gap, or other kind of camps in the United States, in the continental United States, before being resettled into the West Coast, the Midwest, or the South. So after 1975, then you get kind of this second wave. The historiography often depicts the second wave as the boat people, right? These are the people who are escaping on unseaworthy boats, so oftentimes maybe encountering pushback by neighboring first asylum countries such as Malaysia and Thailand, and also bringing a lot of ethnic Chinese to these different borders because of localized discrimination and also class-based restructuring in communist Vietnam. And lastly, diasporic historiography tends to depict the third wave as the more programmatic structured migration patterns, such as the American Homecoming Act, the Orderly Departure Program, and humanitarian operation, which are all kind of different U.S. Programs that help to move people in orderly fashion to the United States instead of, having them escape by boats, which is much more precarious and dangerous route. So in all of these different waves, what you'll see is that they're kind of neatly placed. They place different transits into these kind of temporal periods that is more easily explained in terms of like statecraft and refugee laws and changing refugee policies. And for my project, I'm really more interested in kind of thinking about what I call non-arrival, which is the inability to physically reach or settle into an intended destination, whether due to mobility barriers or challenges of social integration, economic stability, or emotional fulfillment. And through the cases in my project, I think about the people who fail to escape, those who were abandoned either at sea or even kind of like in rescue efforts by the U.S. military, those who suffered life-threatening conditions, including death at sea, piracy, and kidnapping, leading to disappearance, or those who, even after coming to the United States, are unable to settle, right, in the full meaning of that word, even if they gain citizenship, because they continue to face discrimination, economic instability, ecological disaster that uproot them again, or by being deported, which is a story that many people do not tell. And in some of these cases, a lot of these cases, right, there's also room for negotiation. Some refugees refuse resettlement and choose to return of their own volition. So these are just like some examples of what the sources that I'm looking at for this project, which include instances of pushback and refused landing in 1978 and 1979 by the Malaysian Navy, which interdicted many boats that were coming to its borders, into its international waters, and kind of like towing refugees back into sea. And because of this, many of these newspaper clippings that I was able to find kind of depict these boats going capsizing or disappearing. And what I intend to do in the project is then piecing together these different archival fragments to tell the story of non-arrival in a way that's constitutive of a larger history of diaspora, which is not just the people who make it, but also the people who do not arrive, and how that shapes a better understanding of what asylum humanitarian programs and asylum policies must do in order to also resolve the very root causes that motivate people to leave on very dangerous journeys to begin with. So just to quickly kind of go through some of my case studies, I think very deeply about not just majoritarian kind of identities, such as the Qing Vietnamese, that are often associated with when we think about boat people, but also indigenous abandonment. I go into kind of observing and exploring how Montagnard soldiers were effectively abandoned and left behind during the fall of Saigon, leaving them to face retribution and re-education by communist leaders and the communist regime after the takeover of South Vietnam. Secondly, I also think about forced evacuations, people who were forcibly kind of removed from the country unwillingly and then forced to resettle in the U.S. And many of these people would then petition, actually, in 1975, petition to return back to Vietnam, even at the risk of being outed as spies or punished for being associated with the U.S. regime. And that goes into refusing resettlement as well. People who came to Guam realizing that then they did not really want to be separated from their motherland and then choosing to return right to the country. Again, I think about boat pushbacks and non-landing, as well as piracy and gendered violence. The experiences of many women who took these dangerous boat journeys were extremely traumatic and heartbreaking to listen to, because they faced many instances of sexual assault and also, of course, prostitution in places such as like brothels in Thailand, etc. So I delved into this history a little bit more while I was trying to really be cognizant of the sensitivity of the materials that I'm looking at. And lastly, I think through forced repatriation, as a lot of the people who came to refugee camps, whether in Thailand or Malaysia or in Hong Kong, did not, many of them were not able to secure resettlement if they did not have some sort of family connection, familial connection to the U.S. Mainland. And so after years of waiting and lingering in these camps, thousands were actually voluntarily and involuntarily returned to Vietnam. And by kind of studying these case studies, I basically make the argument that we must understand refugee migration history as a kind of non-linear process, a very fragmented, uneven and that migration itself is very fluid geographically and temporally. And we cannot equate kind of understanding refugee history with the kind of patterns, orderly patterns that are attributed to kind of a diasporic history of the survivor, but also a too-shore approach that is very common in immigration history, which is leaving the homeland and arriving in the United States or in the West. I attend to points of interruption and points of return that kind of break away from these orderly histories. And I think with kind of with ruins, with grave sites, with overturned boats, with fragments that don't cohere into a very celebratory narrative of arrival and upward mobility that is commonly associated with refugee stories in the United States. And by doing so, I very much attend to sites of loss, of a mobilization, and I give room and provide space for stories and oral histories about the violence and trauma that are not able to be shared or not easily shared in more celebratory narratives about these settlements. And my hope is by illuminating this particular story in the case of the Vietnamese refugee migration, I hope that non-arrival as an epistemic framework can also grow and become a sort of category and analytic for understanding migration more broadly and attending to these different spaces and points of interruption that are not regularly observed or explored when we think about migration history within the United States. All right, thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I really look forward to conversing more or answering some of your questions if you have them. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share the project that I've been working on as part of my AAUW American Fellowship. My name is Maggie Mattern, and I'm currently an instructor at Stanford University, and I'm excited to share an overview of my project that is entitled Developing a CRISPR Toolkit for Inner Ear Organoid Gene Control. So as a bit of background, why should we care about our inner ear? Well, the inner ear is the organ that allows us to not only perceive sound within our environment around us, but also helps us to navigate our environment by providing us the sense of balance. So the inner ear contains not only the cochlea, which is the hearing organ, but also the vestibular system that allows us to sense vertical, horizontal, and rotational head movement. Inner ear dysfunction represents really a major healthcare burden around the world, with 30 million people in the United States alone suffering from some form of hearing loss, and about 33 million people in the United States reporting problems with dizziness or balance. And unfortunately, there is currently no cure for inner ear dysfunction, and current treatments, at least on the hearing side, such as cochlear implants and hearing aids, do not remedy the underlying inner ear cell damage and loss that results in the inner ear dysfunction. And when I talk about cell damage and loss, what I'm really talking about is damage to the sensory cells of the inner ear called the hair cells. So looking here at a cross section through the cochlea, or the hearing part of the inner ear, we can see these beautiful little cells down here called the hair cells, which are responsible for transmitting sound as well as motion information in the vestibular organ to the brain. These cells are really highly sensitive to damage by things like overstimulation, as well as exposure to certain medications, and also as part of the natural aging process, which is why as we get older, the prevalence of hearing and balance dysfunction actually increases. And the unfortunate thing is that once these cells are gone, they're really gone for good. So there is no natural regeneration of these sensory cells within our inner ear, which leads to permanent dysfunction. And it's for this reason that researchers are continuing to study how these cells develop, so that ultimately regenerative strategies can be created in order to improve inner ear function. And in my research, I use an inner ear organoid model in order to study hair cell development. And this is a model that utilizes the natural developmental signals that happen during embryonic inner ear development to induce stem cells to form these beautiful sensory epithelial structures within 2 weeks that contain sensory hair cells, shown here in pink and also over here in white. So we can use these cells and this model to really study what are the genetic contributions that lead to the formation of hair cells. So, for example, in my work, by taking organoids at multiple different time points from early stages of hair cell development all the way to late stages of development, and performing next generation sequencing in order to look at the gene expression of individual cells within the organoids over time, we can actually track the development of the sensory cells themselves over time. We then can look at the changes in gene expression that occur as those cells transition from their underlying progenitors into more mature hair cells and can prioritize different candidate genes, which we are interested in studying. What is their exact role in the development of these cells? So it's for that reason that the goal of my project is to actually develop a toolkit using the organoid model that we can use to more easily probe our candidate genes functions at different time points during hair cell development within this organoid system. And this will be accomplished by integrating inducible and reversible CRISPR gene targeting technology with genetic activators and inhibitors so that we'll be able to directly modulate the expression of our candidate genes at whatever time point we want during the development of the hair cells within the organoid system. Of course, our ultimate goal is going to be to gain a better understanding of the genetic program that leads to hair cell development so that we can hopefully one day mimic this developmental program in a damaged inner ear in order to restore hair cells and therefore restore function. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to thank very much AAUW for helping to support this work over the past several months, as well as my additional funding sources. And I've included here my contact information, and I would be happy to follow up on any portion of this presentation and discuss it further via email. So thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Faith Bennett. I am a PhD candidate in history with a designated emphasis in feminist theory and research at the University of California, Davis. I am working on a dissertation that has received support from the AAUW, and it is titled Side Work: Changing Craft Consciousness Amidst the Decline of San Francisco Bay Area Restaurant Unions from the 1940s to the 1980s. I am so grateful for this support, and I am so excited to be able to share this research with you and to hopefully share it with even more AAUW members. To explain a little bit of where my research is coming from, my area of study is United States history, but I work within the subfields of labor history, movement history, and the history of women, gender, and sexuality. My approach is informed by feminist research and methodology in addition to historical methods. And the project is a book-length dissertation that is a political history of bar, cafe, and restaurant workers in the San Francisco Bay Area from the 1940s to 1980s. So paying particular attention to those workers' identities, lived experiences, and their political lives and community experiences. My sources include archival sources from traditional archives such as the GLBT Historical Society at San Francisco, which I visited multiple times in order to see individual collections as well as collections of institutions such as the Tavern Guild, and the Labor Archive and Research Center at the John Paul Leonard Library at San Francisco State University. And there I've spent a great deal of time over several visits over the last couple of years, looking at union meeting minutes for different union locals in the East Bay and San Francisco, looking at personal collections and looking at the archives of other institutions and newspapers, including the People's World Journal. I've also used digital archives. These are archival sources that have been digitized by such institutions as the University of California at Berkeley. And through such things, I've been able to look at personal archives as well as additional movement newspapers. I've been looking at publicly available newspaper archives in order to get a sense of the greater public's perception of different actions and different things that were going on in bars, cafes, and restaurants that are topics of my study, as well as different labor actions. I've been searching movement periodicals and community periodicals such as the Chinese Digest, the Bay Area Reporter, etc. Some of these have been digitized by a variety of institutions, and some can be found on repositories such as Marxist.org. And lastly, I've been conducting oral histories. These are critical in sort of filling in the gaps where I can't find answers in archival sources. I've conducted 2 thus far and have made contact with additional sources. Lastly, I have an extensive amount of secondary source material that results from extensive historiographic research, or sort of a literature review of labor history, of immigration history, of union history, political history, economic history, gender, sexuality history, all of these things. This is a pretty brief overview of the types of research questions that have found their way into my dissertation and that have been sort of guiding the theme. The first is what has made San Francisco bar, cafes, and restaurants unique. I'm also asking, why were workers able to successfully unionize so many dining places within the Bay Area from the 1930s to the 1960s? And they really were able to unionize what was an astonishing number of dining houses at that time, to the point where they could largely control the standard, the wage standard within the city. But this leads me to ask what contributed to the departure of so many bars, clubs, cafes, and restaurants from the Union in the 1970s and 1980s. This is the period of the starkest decline, which leads to our current circumstance, where there are fewer than 3 independent restaurants in San Francisco that are currently unionized. How did other political experiences of community organizing influence union participation and the working lives of Bay Area food service workers? Many of the individuals and communities that I study were also active in their communities, and what I have found is that this had significant bearing on their participation within the union. I also ask how race, immigration status, ability to speak English, gender, and sexuality impacted individuals' working lives and their opinions of unions. More on that in the findings on the next slide. I ask what we can infer about U.S. bar, cafe, and restaurant labor after looking at this case study in the Bay Area. This is really important. Ultimately, the reason we do such focused case studies is because we do think that we can determine something about the larger picture from them, even though, as I argue, San Francisco is quite unique. And so what tools other than unions have workers used to assert control over their working lives? And there's some of this in the findings, but some of this is also to be determined. Just to give an overview of some sort of initial findings here. One critical finding is that new campaigns to organize bars, cafes, and restaurants, especially among demographics with less of a history of unionization, were more successful when the demand came from workers themselves, or when unengaged members were contacted by union members who were also members of their respective communities. 2, individuals and communities who felt ignored by traditional unions were likely to avoid unions and more likely to form other networks that could offer job opportunities or promise to assert control over the workplace through other means. 3. The creation and dissemination of periodicals amongst union members created a more informed membership and provided networks for debate. Dissent within union structures actually bred high participation. And language justice campaigns were important in engaging members for whom English was not their primary language. And lastly, and this is very important to me, the loss of restaurants from the union was the result of several economic and legal factors, and not a result of the loss of a desire for the union from restaurant workers themselves. So this is just a quick overview of the current project, which has been funded by the AAUW. And again, I've had such a wonderful time sharing this with members of the AAUW branch and OML in California, and I hope to share it with more soon. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joanne DeCaro. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you all today. First, I would like to tell you a little bit about my scholarly identity. My research is interdisciplinary. My research sits at the intersection of punishment and public health scholarship. I research trauma, coping, aging and dying, and COVID-19 conditions. My work is intended to speak to scholars across the social sciences, humanities, and public health disciplines. I am a trained oral historian and have a certificate in the digital humanities. I've been the co-founder or founder of 4 community archives and have worked on another 2. I am a community-grounded and public scholar. I produce multimedia, community-centered projects that are designed to communicate to wider non-academic audiences. I am someone deeply invested in the rich historical and social context of my subjects' lives and their community's larger history. I house the oral histories I collected for my dissertation in a public archive I created called Lifer Records. It is an oral history collection of the experiences of life sentencing in California. I work and study with people who are referred to as lifers. Lifers are people who have had life sentences, such as 25 to life or 15 to life. They can be released as early as 15 or 25 years, but also can be held indefinitely. The major research questions in my study are: what is the range and depth of the trauma histories for people who have experienced long-term incarceration in California? What are the common traumas lifers and long-termers experience inside prison? How does trauma affect the overall experience of incarceration? And how does trauma affect reentry success and well-being? The study I conducted for my dissertation is a 5-year mixed method study of lifers and long-termers in the reentry process in California. It includes interviews and other data collected with family members, loved ones, and service providers. I was embedded at 2 reentry facilities in the Southern California area, plus I visited others, and I also attended community-run trauma healing groups. Here's a breakdown of information of some of my participants. I collected oral histories from 53 people. I conducted surveys with 41 people. I spent over 1,000 hours in the field conducting participant observation. My oral histories were over 150 hours of interviews. Most of the interviews I conducted were between 2 and 4 hours, and with many people, I conducted multiple interviews and visits over multiple years. You can also see a demographic table of my oral history subjects. The methods that I conducted in my dissertation study included oral histories, participant observations, surveys, short-form interviews, and the collection of social artifacts. Right now, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my dissertation. My first chapter is on carceral time. Carceral time is normally theorized as the unending cyclical present, but it is also an experience of time that is often haunted and overlaid by traumas of the past. This includes the communal past of terrorized communities and the individual past of childhoods often filled with serious, prolonged trauma exposure. As well, prison itself is an environment that produces its own underlying form of structural trauma. This chapter supports the notion that some prison pains are ongoing in nature and not simply confined to a rough initial adjustment period. People might spend half of their sentences or more trapped in their trauma responses and maladaptive coping patterns, and those trauma responses can follow them into their reentry experience. The second chapter of my dissertation is on the concept of carceral trauma. It's a concept I have created. When participants describe forms of trauma exposure that are too frequent to count, unrelenting, and just part of the prison experience, they fall into the category of carceral trauma, which is the ongoing, underlying trauma of the prison experience. In this chapter, I discuss 4 aspects of carceral trauma: fear of violence, the climate of death, moral compromises, and dehumanization. This work elevates the understanding of long-term, ongoing exposure to traumas as similar to those that in the far more heavily studied areas of war and displacement. My third dissertation chapter is on the emotional significance of social ties in the reentry process. The majority of reentry scholarship studies the transactional benefits of family relations and other social ties in reentry. It's about how those social ties help people secure jobs, housing, and meet other practical needs. Our social relationships are typically discussed in the negative, often in terms of relapsing and addiction. On the other hand, I examine the deeper and broader emotional landscape of social ties in the reentry process, and the many ways these emotional bonds can help and harm people with extensive trauma histories. I will now tell you a little bit about my broader research agenda. It sits at the intersection of carceral studies and public health. I study the physical and mental well-being of people in prison and people returning home from prison. I conducted, along with a faculty member, an 11-site prison study. I was the co-leader and co-designer of this study. We conducted 20 group interviews with 110 incarcerated people across 10 facilities in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. We also interviewed 35 medical staff members across 10 facilities and conducted an extended ethnographic research at a hospice at 11th facility. I am also one of the co-founders of the Prison Pandemic Project. It's an archive of the conditions of confinement in California carceral facilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. We collected 4,000 letters and phone calls from people incarcerated across the state during the pandemic. We collected these materials from all 34 state prisons, 56 out of the 58 counties, and ICE and federal facilities. It is the largest and most comprehensive collection of data on carceral pandemic conditions in the United States. In the end, I'd like to emphasize again that I am a community-grounded and public social scientist. I have strong ties to the communities I research. For 6 years, I have co-run a legal clinic for lifers with the Restorative Justice Fund at the Francisco Homes in Los Angeles. Throughout my 5 years of conducting research with lifers, I have prioritized giving back to the community through legal aid and social work. I am also the co-founder of a national archival project, Mourning Our Losses, that records and honors the death of those who live and work in prison. We put on an art exhibit on COVID conditions in prisons throughout the nation. Here we are at the University of Chicago Logan Center. With the prison pandemic team, we also put on an art exhibit on the UCI campus about the conditions of confinement during COVID in California, where you could listen to calls from prison on prisoner phones. That's the end of my discussion. Thank you again so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adamaka Ajaelo, and I'm the founding executive director of Self-Esteem. We received the AAUW Community Action Grant for our early STEM immersion program, focusing on developing and sustaining girl STEM identities. This year, we're celebrating 10 years of impact. Our organization was founded in 2014 with a mission of igniting pride, purpose, and possibility among BIPOC girls and women through culturally relevant STEM training. In 2015, we launched our free annual one-week STEM exploration camp, welcoming 60 girls. Then in 2016, we expanded our program to include our monthly STEM engagement workshops to really focus on getting the girls outside of the classroom. And then we also launched our weekly after-school robotics program. In 2017, we made history as the first all-girls team of underrepresented BIPOC girls to compete in the first North Cal Lega League. In 2018, we were the first all-girls underrepresented BIPOC team to compete in the first Tech Challenge. Over the last 10 years, our organization has received numerous awards. We've gone through a branding enhancement, but at the organization level, our organization has identified 3 core strategies to really advance our mission of really envisioning a world where girls and women of color are recognized, respected, and valued as STEM innovators, entrepreneurs, and change makers, driving solutions for all. Our mission and programs. Before we dive into our mission and program, let's talk about the STEM ecosystem problem. So despite numerous of efforts to increase STEM programming and career pathways, BIPOC women are still being kept out and pushed out of the STEM pipeline. We know this to be true with only 5% of the STEM professionals being BIPOC women. And then when we think about the diversion from STEM being pushed out, for every 12 women of color that graduated with a STEM degree, after 2 years, there's only about 5 working in the STEM fields. After 10 years, this number drops to 3. Now, when we're talking about the future of work is really this evolving landscape of how work will be conducted and influenced by rapid advancements in technology, digitalization, and changing in society norms. So this is going to require what we call a skill revolution, where due to the evolving job landscape, due to AI and automation, there's going to be an emphasis in highly skilled jobs in various industries. There's also going to be a need for career pathway. There's going to be a projected shift where 1 in 16 workers will need to change their occupation by 2030. In addition to that, there's going to be this digital workforce, where we're seeing with this remote work, e-commerce, and digital transactions is really going to accelerate the demand in delivering within transportation, within warehouse automation, and within technology adoption. So our mission, self-esteem ignites pride, purpose, and possibility among girls by providing STEM training that strengthens digital, technical, and leadership skills, reinforcing the STEM identity. We see ourselves as a conduit of creating a robust talent pipeline of innovators prepared for the future of work and really driving economic mobility. Our approach to this body of work is a multi-year programming strategy. We focus on providing critical development support at the critical stages, ensuring early development and sustainment of a STEM identity. For our early STEM immersion program, which is our foundation stage, this is targeted to young girls ages 7 to 17, and it's really focusing on engaging and inspiring them. We are providing programs that empower innovators through training, mentorship, and networking to really develop their technical skills and career readiness for the future of work. Our emerging STEM program, which is currently in development, is our sustainability stage for our innovators as they age out of our early STEM immersion program, focusing on age groups 18 to 25. This is really sustaining and recruiting this talent pool. And we're doing this through community-based programming that really equips these innovators for success through targeted workshops and coaching, fostering both corporate and entrepreneur career pathways. And we believe using this approach that this will really close the STEM workforce gap. It will unlock hidden sources of innovation, really fostering diversity of thought to really drive that innovation there. And then ultimately inspiring future STEM leaders and innovators that can really change this landscape. So program stage 1, our early STEM immersion program, in which we received the AAUW Community Action Grant, really focused on unlocking that STEM career identity by normalizing BIPOC girls' brilliance and self-esteem through STEM. This program delivery consists of an intensive 1-week STEM summer camp. Then we have robotics team competitions in the fall. And then during the spring semester, it's our digital and AI literacy training. And throughout the year, we provide monthly and weekly STEM engagement workshops to really reinforce their STEM identities. Our outcome and impact today. So currently, midway through the program, we've served 125 girls aged 7 to 17 by providing over 120 hours of STEM training. Some of our key outcomes focus across these 4 key areas. So increasing interest and engagement in STEM subjects. 93% of our innovators stated an increase in engagement in STEM, in the STEM subjects through our pre and post surveys. And based off of our program where we provide project-based activities, all of our innovators have completed all of the activities assigned to them. Regarding leadership, collaboration, and problem solving, 100% have increased in sustained teamwork and collaboration skills, and 100% of our innovators stated confidence in tackling problems and creative thinking. When we think about these advanced skill sets, 94% of our innovators increased an increase in their computer programming and digital skills, and 100% have been upskilled in which we call mid-level and advanced technical skill sets, and that's through robotics, product design, and AI technology. Regarding their STEM career identity and a sense of belonging to thrive, 92% of our innovators have identified their STEM career identities through our program, and 96% have really stated that they have a sense of belonging and believe that they can continue their education and career pursuits in the STEM fields. When we think about our demographics, which is our demographics of our innovators, 77% of our innovators are Black and African American, followed by 7% Asian Pacific Islander and 7% 2 or more races. And Hispanic reflects 60% of our ethnic group, followed by 1% each in the white and Caucasian, Arab and Middle Eastern, and American Indian and Alaskan and Native American population. When we look at our distribution, the bulk of our innovators are in the East Bay and they reside in Alameda County. And when we look at the age group distribution, 43% of our innovators are between age groups 10 to 12. And then when we think about our population that are eligible for free or reduced lunch, it's 65%. And 30% of our innovators will be, or currently are, first-generation college students. Our program timeline. So for the first half, we've completed our STEM Exploration Camp this July 2004. And we've had STEM engagements from July to December of this year of 2024. During this fall, our robotics program, which we just recently wrapped up, which was a 18-week-long session that we completed this program activity. For the second half of our program timeline, we're going to continue with our STEM engagement activities, which is curated field trips and engaging workshops to really provide that interactive conversation with diverse STEM professionals. And then we're going to launch the last part of our program component, which is our digital and generative AI course programming, which will introduce our participants to foundational AI concepts, problem solving, and using digital tools. This is going to be a hands-on experience that really develops their entrepreneurial mindset and really helps them to leverage emerging technology. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Hi, I'm Esther Nwanna. I'm a postdoctoral researcher with the School of Veterinary Medicine Teaching and Research Center, University of California, Davis. I want to sincerely thank AAUW for the International Postdoctorate Fellowship Award given on to me, which has helped to advance my research in evaluation of antimicrobial potential of medicinal plants for the treatment of bacterial infection in dairy cattle. I am from West Africa, Nigeria, and from this slide, we can see I just want to give a introduction to the work. In West Africa, women play a significant larger role in agricultural production than in traditional household support, often contributing most of their labor in farming. And from this slide, you can see women in the market because we cultivate the crops and we also take it to the market to sell to earn an income to support the family. And by doing that, they are also contributing to part of SDG goal. And a write-up on World Bank Group says that when women thrive, countries and community thrives. Problem statement. According to World Health Organization 2024, it proposes on One Health, which has been a long time, but there's a continuous advocate on that there should be a unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance, optimize the health of the people, animal, and ecosystem. And ways of doing that is to optimize the use of antibiotics in livestock, to reduce the problem of antimicrobial resistance in human and environmental health, and to search for alternative medicine through natural products. And that is where I come in as a biochemist, because my research focuses on the use of natural products in the treatment or management or mitigating different disease conditions that affect humans and also animals. Antimicrobial resistance is a global problem, and there's need to mitigate the effects because it cuts across all sectors. It affects the animal, it affects the woman. And one of the ways to mitigate this effect is to reduce the use or uncontrolled use of antibiotics. And my research focused on the use of natural products to mitigate the effects of the bacteria causing mastitis in dairy cattle. And the effects of mastitis, it reduces the quality of milk production, and which has also contributed to economic loss, not both locally but globally, even in the United States of America. My research focused on bacterial pathogen, which is mainly Staphylococcus aureus and Streptococcus species, because they are highly contagious. They can be transferred from the animal to woman. And this slide shows the different selected plants which is locally produced from where I was raised, and it could be found in the six geopolitical zone of Nigeria. From the map of Nigeria, in the six geopolitical zone, they could be found. And preliminary studies done on this plant shows that they have antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial properties. But my research with the center is to work to advance, to look specifically the effects of this drug extract or food extract from the plant on the pathogen that is being cultured from mastitis in dairy cattle in selected California farm. And the interest on my project is what we isolate the compounds from these medicinal plants. Then also I also do computational study of the biotic compound against the protein of interest, the proteins that are responsible for antimicrobial resistance in this organism, to see how this compound, computationally modulate or inhibit the activities or the progression of this protein in this bacteria. Then I will also do the antioxidant assay to determine the antioxidant power of this plant, then the antimicrobial assays. And this experiment, they are in different phases. They are in different phases. That is the in vitro the in vivo, the molecular aspects, and probably the feed application of the extract from the best sample. And the expected result is to develop a pilot scale production of the crude oil from these plants. And also, the outcome is to provide vital information on the mechanism of action of the compound from this medicinal plant with multitherapeutic property, which could be used as antimicrobial drug in livestock and public health management. The long-term impact will reduce antimicrobial resistance in animal, human, and environmental health, improve the likelihood for the farmers, especially women, involved, and create jobs and employment in dairy industry and farm, create large-scale cultivation of the plant, showcase these local products in the global scientific market. Thank you for listening, and thanks to AAUW.